Before we get into the video, last week we tried out a new narrator, and the responses more or less were in favor of the old narrator, so that's me, coming back, and I just wanted to say that I will be continuing the narration for the future of this channel, so you can enjoy your videos in smooth 144 kHz ASMR. There are a complex set of criteria that each individual unknowingly possesses, which makes them distinguish between what is attractive to them and what is not. Society, culture, past experience, all of these things have a role in determining what an individual considers to be beautiful. This personal choice of aesthetic does have some coherence, an objective reality if you will, as it is not entirely a personal choice, but something that is conditioned by those around us. So in other words, culture, and more importantly familiarity, plays a huge role in shaping our beauty standards. In this coverage of South Asia, we'll be looking at the tip of this beauty iceberg from a historical perspective, and what better way to analyze historical context than with representation of people in art. This coverage focuses heavily on the Indian subcontinent, and neighboring countries such as Afghanistan, being more ethnically diverse, are actually closer to Middle Eastern or Eastern beauty standards because they're at the crossroads of two large influential regions. I'll be using Indian and South Asian interchangeably to refer to the subcontinent as a whole. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already to catch our upcoming series on beauty in art. In recent years, it has been argued that beauty standards in India have begun to dramatically change. In particular, the claim is that beauty standards have narrowed with the requirements for ideal beauty becoming increasingly constricted. To understand these changes, it is best to look at not just how the standards of beauty have changed, but what they were initially, especially when you consider that the Indian civilization were one of the first ones in existence. The earliest images of female figures in India represented women with large breasts, wide hips, and tapering legs. Women in these images were described as being stiff, but only half a century later, still during the Sunga period, images of women showed bodies contorted into an S shape for increased eroticism. These depictions are very close to the fertility idols seen around the world at different points in an emerging civilization's history, which unsurprisingly draws a link to the hourglass figure being a timelessly desirable trait which still shows up in postmodern forms. It's a universal or biological standard of femininity rather than a cultural one, because these regions are heavily influenced by estrogen. The S-shaped curve had become the beauty standard during the Kushan period. Now compare this depiction from the Ajanta caves to the earlier drawings, where the pre-4th century BC artists focused on symbolizing feminine beauty standards. The more contemporary ones focused on accurately depicting it with proportion, scale, and dimorphism. Here the postures are more relaxed, candid portraits with a greater focus on grace and slenderness. What's more interesting to me are the stylistic choices used for her face, with her nose having a low nasolabial angle, i.e. the nose points downwards rather than upwards. Her nose being pointed downward is characteristically a part of the South Asian nose shape. It's seen time and time again in both classic and contemporary works, with women having a straight but sharp nose with a low nasolabial angle and a relatively neutral tip. What is not seen in any of these drawings, even the 1st century AD ones, is the presence of a convex nasal contour due to a prominent dorsal hump. While hook noses or aquiline noses may look good on certain faces, especially men more so than women, the Indian beauty standards do not seem to agree with it for their faces for the last 2000 or so years. Something that I've also found strange about this Indian sculpture is how Aryan the facial features actually are. While India at the time had a large immigrant Aryan population from 1500 BC and earlier, it makes sense when you compare the two figures, both 3/4 turns but very different faces. That's because this figurine is from the Gandhara region close to the Peshawar region in Pakistan, whereas the first is from the Ajanta caves deep in central India. With the world being much smaller back then, that large of a distance might as well be from here to the moon. As Robert Bracy's essay on women in Kushnan history stipulates, Gandharan artists are representing everyday Indian women, whereas the Indian artists are not representing a particular woman, but a symbolic representation of women in general, such as in creating a divine idol. From Cribb and Ernington's 1992 essay on ancient India and Iran, they believe the beauty ideal to lie in the Gandharan representations rather than the Indian ones with the more Aryan features, likely because of the familiarity model, because people tend to like the looks of whatever they're more exposed to. But we'll cut short the information overload there for one video. In the Gandharan works, the features are entirely expected of South Asian men and women, with rounder face shapes, flatter chins, and very masculine gonio angles. Two examples off the top would be Aishwarya Rai and Kareena Kapoor, with these exact features, and they're both beauty icons in their own right, so Cribb and Ernington were likely right in saying that this is the beauty standard for the region. These ancient figurines tell us a lot about how the early subcontinent imposed their beauty standards, but have little to add in regards to skin complexion or colorism. As by now, I'm guessing everyone has seen the Vice documentaries on skin bleaching, or are somewhat aware of the issue in the region, but it is generally a predetermined prejudice against those with darker skin tones. British colonial influence definitely had an impact in occidentalizing South Asian beauty standards by enforcing systematic discrimination where they would refuse social access to dark-skinned Indians and allow it to those with fairer skin. Likewise, other invaders in the past, such as the Muslim Mughals, had a racial impact on the region by being fair-skinned Middle Easterns, but reliable historical sources are dubious at best. In ancient India, being dark-skinned was not an issue, as quoted from Mishra's Washington University essay on colorism, where she talks about historical folklore and mythological beliefs having dark-skinned heroes. In a 2008 study by Lee and colleagues, they investigated skin lightening and beauty in 4 Asian cultures: Indian, Hong Kong, Japanese, and Korean. For the sake of this video, we'll only be focusing on the results from the Indian ones. The study focused on how advertisements in magazines portray skin color to women. Content analysis was recorded to include information about the model's identity, skin color, appearance, and product in 108 advertisements. Skincare advertisements in all countries portrayed ideal skin to be smooth, shiny, white, and poreless. Quote-unquote bad skin, to give it a name, was portrayed as dark, dry, and rough. In India, a larger percentage of the models tended to be Indian models or celebrities. This can be attributed to the recent globalization of Indian beauty, such as the Western export of beauty pageant winners. While this has the positive effect of familiarizing the world with Indian ethnic features, it has a selection bias issue where the majority of those being represented tended to have fairer skin, Caucasian features, representative of their ancient Aryan ancestors. From the study, we can gather that the media also has an integral role in shaping the Indian beauty standard. I won't go any deeper into colorism or the ideal skin tone, quote unquote, as many South Asians unfortunately still believe exists. There are better resources on the topic, and it already has a lot of coverage. A further study by Unikrishnan in 2016 attempted to answer important questions on how these beauty standards affect the South Indian population. A questionnaire was delivered to 333 participants, ranging from women 15 to 34 years of age, and the authors hypothesized that women less than 25 years old were more influenced due to the pressures of the pre-globalization era compared to women who are older than 25. Unsurprisingly, their results did agree with their hypothesis. Women who were concerned about their appearance based on their body features were 11% less likely to appreciate the standard South Indian features. The most common body shape in the study for the women were found to be a mix of the pear and neat hourglass shapes, and these findings actually agree with what we've seen in the art and literature from the 400 BC figures we saw at the beginning of the video. Also, women who were concerned about their skin complexion and felt confident only when they looked one shade lighter were 13% less likely to appreciate standard South Indian features, and an overwhelming percentage of these women were under 25 years of age. The other subset in the group of older women were 66% more likely to be satisfied with their body and facial features that they were given. This clearly shows that globalization is not able to influence older South Indian women as much as the younger ones, and it could be that the existing beauty standard is a result of 21st century culture and not a universal standard as we saw in the past. And lastly, from the study, women who agreed to beauty enhancements were 22% more likely to attribute their desire to look better to celebrities and pop culture. Now, granted that the study does have a few limitations in that they're looking at South Indians who are traditionally darker skinned and northernmost regions of the entire subcontinent who are typically of lighter skinned ethnicities may have completely different aesthetic priorities. So to understand how much of this is actually culture and how much is universal, we have to look at another study. Chitra and Prasanna looked at the perception of facial attractiveness in the Indian population among different groups. Facial profiles were generated for both male and female subjects, and software was used to create 8 different morphed profiles. 5 different groups of raters were asked to choose the most to least attractive profiles from 1 to 8. The results demonstrated that, regardless of the type of rater, 70% of the males and 57% of the females preferred straight, normally developed profiles. The least attractive profiles were those with jaw misalignment, such as retrognathic maxillas and prognathic mandibles. The study does have some noteworthy results. It shows that having proper jaw alignment is a universal characteristic, and it's something that we obviously covered on the channel in a much earlier video under the same perspective. It signals proper facial growth and genetic health, so it only makes sense that we would want to avoid medically classified deformities regardless of region. Beauty standards that apply to other parts of the world overlap with South Asian beauty standards, and the only real point of difference this region has shown from art and history is in the lower jaw angle and nose shape. Everything else we can assume to have similarities with other regional beauty standards, such as the Middle Eastern or Eastern ones. To summarize the findings, Gandhara sculptures of what is now modern-day Pakistan are closest to representing the modern-day South Asian beauty standard. Although not a perfect representation due to the artist's stylistic choices and talent, they combine the Greco-Roman ideals of the pre-BC Aryan invaders with the native Indian population to come up with something that's better representative of the changing demographic. These faces have sharp, straight noses with a pointed nasal tip and a downward pointing nasolabial angle. The cheeks are plump and not as projected, but compensated for with stylized beards and hair to symbolize virility. The periocular region is always sculpted with a noticeable contour depression, and this causes the lower eyelid to rise up very prominently, almost to the point of exaggerated alien-like protrusion. While this exaggeration may be due to the Buddhist art style, it is a very common ethnic facial trait for people from the region. You can compare this easily to the Greco-Roman statues and see that their eyelid protrusions are much lower. Lastly, the forehead is flat with very little incline, and both men and women have shown low brow projection, as this was seen as a sign of being more sophisticated and modernized from humankind's dolichocephalic Neanderthal cousins. If you've enjoyed the content so far, then please do support the channel by subscribing. We're almost at 200k, and your suggestions are what helps us produce quality content. If you would like for your features to be analyzed like the Gandharans, you can order an aesthetics report over at the KU's website.